On March 10th, 2026, a video surfaced online that felt like a magnificent triumph over time itself. A man celebrating his 86th birthday in a Hawaiian sun, throwing fierce, rapid-fire punches at a sparring partner half his age. He looked directly into the lens, flashed a legendary grin, and declared to the world, "I don't age. I level up." For 9 luminous days, the internet erupted. It felt like absolute proof of the ultimate 2-decade-old joke. Death plays fair and lets Chuck Norris win. But on the morning of March 19th, 2026, that invincible illusion was permanently, heartbreakingly shattered. Just 9 days after that defiant birthday video, the Norris family released a statement that stopped the world cold. At 86 years old, surrounded by his family, the global icon of American toughness had suffered a sudden, fatal medical emergency. No long decline, no warning. The man who shaped a generation's definition of masculinity was simply gone. How does the world process the sudden death of a man we secretly hoped would live forever? What was the quiet, agonizing reality hidden behind the martial arts empire and the internet memes? And what does it teach us about true strength? When the toughest man on earth spends his final years fighting his most desperate battles not on a movie set, but holding his sick wife's hand in a hospital room. Before we answer these questions, we must go back to the beginning. To understand the immortal legend who just left us, you must first meet the terrified, invisible boy who was afraid of his own shadow. The dust of Oklahoma, the absent father, and the armor of discipline. There are no spotlights where the story of Chuck Norris begins. There is no applause, no cameras, and absolutely no mythology. There is only the biting, relentless wind of the American Midwest, blowing across a landscape where broken dreams settle on the ground as easily as the dust. We look at the rugged, immovable jawline of the Texas Ranger, and we assume he was born with fists made of iron. But the truth is infinitely more fragile and profoundly more inspiring. He was born Carlos Ray Norris on March 10th, 1940, in the tiny, unforgiving town of Ryan, Oklahoma. He entered the world into a family that was already deeply fractured before it ever had a real chance to hold itself together. His father, Ray Norris, was a World War II veteran. But like so many men of that era, Ray returned from the bloody battlefields carrying heavy, invisible wounds that no metal could ever acknowledge. To numb the agonizing horrors of the war, his father turned to the bottle. He was a man entirely consumed by alcohol, a phantom who was absent even when he was physically sitting in the room. He drifted in and out of his family's life like a cold, destructive storm that nobody could predict and nobody could stop. His mother, Wilma, was the absolute opposite. She was a woman of iron faith and quiet, staggering endurance. She raised her 3 sons largely alone, stretching every single penny until it nearly broke, holding the crumbling family together with her callous hands and an unshakable belief in a higher power. When the toxic, volatile marriage finally ended in divorce, Wilma packed up her boys and began a nomadic, desperate search for stability. They moved to Prairie Village, Kansas, and eventually pushed further west to Torrance, California. For young Carlos, every single move was a fresh, agonizing reminder that roots were a luxury his family simply could not afford. In the ruthless, primitive hierarchy of the 1950s schoolyard, a boy without a father and without money is immediately identified as prey. Carlos was half Irish and half Cherokee. He was incredibly small, physically uncoordinated, and shy to the absolute point of invisibility. But the deepest, most agonizing source of his childhood trauma was not his poverty. It was his voice. Young Carlos suffered from a severe, crippling stutter. Imagine the sheer, suffocating humiliation of being a boy who desperately wants to connect with the world, but whose throat locks up in panic every time he is called upon in a classroom. Every simple conversation was a public execution of his dignity. Reflecting decades later on the terrified, broken boy he used to be, Chuck delivered a quote of such disarming, brutal honesty that it completely shatters the illusion of the fearless tough guy. "I was a shy, unathletic, and mediocre student, he confessed, stripping away the Hollywood armor. I was terrified of conflict. I never stood up for myself. I was the kid who just wanted to disappear. Listen to the heartbreaking gravity of that admission. The man who would eventually become the global symbol of unstoppable aggression spent his entire childhood praying that nobody would look at him. He was a deeply traumatized boy quietly suffocating in the terrifying shadow of his alcoholic father, convinced that he was destined to inherit the exact same pathetic, broken life. But sometimes, a man must run to the very edge of the earth to finally discover who he is actually meant to be. In 1958, at 18 years old, Carlos Ray Norris made a decision that would quietly, permanently rewrite his entire destiny. He enlisted in the United States Air Force. It is crucial to understand his psychological motivation here. He did not join the military out of a profound sense of cinematic heroism. He joined the military out of absolute desperation. It was an act of escape. He was running away from the suffocating poverty of California, running away from his stutter, and running away from the terrifying realization that if he did not drastically alter his environment, his father's dark legacy would become his own. The Air Force sent the quiet, trembling teenager thousands of miles away from home, stationing him at the Osan Air Base in South Korea. And it was there in the freezing, disciplined environment of a foreign land that a miracle occurred. Walking through a local village one afternoon, Carlos witnessed a group of Korean men practicing a traditional, incredibly dynamic martial art. Their movements were explosive, precise, and possessed a quiet, terrifying power. He was completely mesmerized. He had discovered Tang Soo Do. He immediately enrolled in training, stepping onto the freezing wooden floors of the dojang. For a boy who had spent his entire life feeling entirely powerless and physically inadequate, the martial arts were not just a sport. They were a profound, spiritual revelation. Tang Soo Do did not require him to speak. It did not care about his stutter. It was a language spoken entirely through disciplined sweat and absolute presence. Every time he threw a punch, every time he endured the agonizing pain of a blocking drill, he was actively silencing the terrified little boy from Oklahoma. He trained with a manic, obsessive dedication. He trained until his knuckles bled and his muscles screamed in agony. He was not learning how to fight other men. He was learning how to fight the demons inside his own head. It changed my life, he later reflected, acknowledging the absolute salvation he found in the dojo. It gave me a sense of self-worth that I had never, ever experienced before. It taught me that I wasn't a victim. He earned his black belt, and when he finally boarded a plane to return to American soil in 1962, honorably discharged with the rank of Airman First Class, a profound, permanent alchemy had taken place. The shy, stuttering, invisible boy named Carlos, who lived in constant terror of the world, had been completely left behind in the snows of South Korea. The man who stepped off the plane in California possessed a straight spine, a quiet, terrifying confidence, and new nickname given to him by his military brothers. He was now Chuck Norris. He had built a magnificent, impenetrable armor of discipline around his fractured soul. He was finally beginning to understand the incredible, undeniable power he held within his own two hands. But as he opened his first tiny, struggling martial arts studio back in America, waiting on a police department application that would never come through, the newly minted warrior was entirely unaware of the monumental destiny waiting for him. He did not know that his fists were about to carry him to 6 undefeated world championships. And he certainly could not have predicted that the quiet discipline he mastered in Korea was about to catch the attention of a legendary, mythical Chinese dragon named Bruce Lee. The undefeated champion, the dragon's call, and the sudden silence. There's a profound, undeniable difference between a man who fights because he loves violence and a man who fights because he is desperate to conquer his own fear. When Chuck Norris returned to California in 1962, honorably discharged from the Air Force, he was a young man carrying the sacred, quiet discipline of Tang Soo Do. He applied to become a police officer, hoping for a steady, predictable life. But while waiting for the application to be processed, he opened a small, deeply humble martial arts studio to pay the rent. It was not a glamorous enterprise. It was a room that smelled of canvas mats, old sweat, and burning ambition. Chuck began to enter local martial arts tournaments. The Hollywood mythology would have you believe that he walked onto mat and instantly demolished every opponent in his path. But reality is far more brutal and infinitely more educational than mythology. In his earliest tournaments, Chuck was decisively beaten. He lost to fighters like Joe Louis and Alan Steen. He was knocked down. He dropped rounds he believed he should have won. For the boy who had spent his entire childhood terrified of conflict, losing a physical fight in front of a crowd could have easily reawakened the cowardly, stuttering ghosts of his past. He could have quit, hung up his black belt, and accepted his limitations. But Chuck Norris did not quit. He absorbed the humiliating agony of defeat, went back to his empty studio, and completely dismantled his own technique. He refined. He endured. He sparred until his muscles screamed and his bones ached. He transformed his body into an immaculate, hyper-efficient weapon. By 1967, the quiet boy from Oklahoma stepped onto the mat and absolutely obliterated the competition. He won the All-American Karate Championship. The following year, he won the professional middleweight karate champion title. And then, he did something almost mathematically impossible. He defended that world championship title for 6 consecutive years. He retired utterly, entirely undefeated. He eventually founded his own martial arts discipline, Tang Soo Do, and was awarded the legendary 10th degree black belt, an honor representing the absolute, undisputed pinnacle of human physical mastery. The invisible, stuttering child of an absent alcoholic father had officially become the most dangerous, respected martial artist in the Western Hemisphere. But the world of Hollywood in the late 1960s was not waiting for Chuck Norris. The cinematic landscape was dominated by counterculture hippies, slick, fast-talking leading men, and theatrical anti-heroes. The studios were not looking for a stoic, quiet karate champion from Oklahoma with absolutely no acting training, no agent, and no polished Hollywood connections. But Hollywood had not yet met Bruce Lee. It was during the 1968 Long Beach International Karate Championships that Chuck Norris first crossed paths with a man who would crack open the locked door of his future. Bruce Lee had heard rumors about this unusually skilled, fiercely disciplined American fighter, and he sought him out. What began as a professional curiosity quickly evolved into something infinitely deeper. It was a genuine, unbreakable friendship built on the rare, mutual respect that only forms between two men who understand absolute physical discipline in their bones. They were kindred spirits. They spent hours training together in the backyard, exchanging philosophies, pushing each other's physical limits, and dissecting the spiritual architecture of combat. And in 1972, Bruce Lee offered his friend a role that would place Chuck Norris squarely in front of the entire globe. Bruce was directing and starring in The Way of the Dragon. He needed an opponent who could actually pose a legitimate, terrifying physical threat to him on screen. He called Chuck and asked him to play Colt, a lethal American martial artist hired by the Mafia to eliminate him. The climax of that film took place inside the ancient, crumbling walls of the Colosseum in Rome. To watch that specific fight scene today is to witness an absolute, untouchable masterpiece of cinematic history. There were no stunt doubles. There were no computer-generated effects. There were no wires. It was just two supreme, legendary masters of their craft, stepping onto the ancient gladiator sand, projecting an aura of pure, unadulterated danger. Look at the moments right before the fight begins. Two warriors stretching, cracking their joints in pure, deafening silence before the storm. Chuck Norris was not yet a movie star, but after that 10-minute sequence, his face, his immense physical gravity, and his stoic, unblinking presence were permanently burned into the memory of audiences worldwide. He was standing on the threshold of cinematic immortality. But the universe, operated with its trademark, terrifying cruelty, was about to deliver a blow that no amount of martial arts training could ever block. In July of 1973, just as their monumental collaboration was capturing the imagination of the globe, Bruce Lee died suddenly in Hong Kong. He was only 32 years old. The shockwave that hit the world was catastrophic, but the psychological devastation inflicted upon Chuck Norris was profoundly personal and agonizingly deep. Chuck carried that loss with a heavy, dignified quietness that he rarely allowed the public to see. Reflecting on the sheer, irreplaceable magnitude of his friend, Chuck would later deliver a quote that bypassed the Hollywood mythology and spoke directly to the heart of the man. "Bruce was one of the most remarkable human beings I had ever known," Chuck recalled, his voice carrying the deep, echoing weight of grief. "He was lightning fast, a true visionary. The world lost something entirely irreplaceable. I lost a friend who believed in me when he owed me absolutely nothing. I lost a friend who believed in me when he owed me absolutely nothing." Listen to the breathtaking sorrow in those words. For Chuck, a man who had spent his life building an indestructible physical armor to protect himself from the tragedies of his childhood, the sudden, inexplicable death of Bruce Lee was a terrifying reminder of human fragility. It taught him the exact same agonizing lesson that the world is currently feeling in the wake of Chuck's own sudden passing in 2026. No matter how strong you are, no matter how many championships you win, and no matter how invincible you appear on screen, death plays by its own unpredictable, merciless rules. Grief, however, did not paralyze Chuck Norris. As it so often does with men of extraordinary character, grief pushed him forward. Chuck returned to his martial arts studios in Los Angeles, quietly mourning his friend. Among his private students was a man who happened to be the biggest, most unapologetic movie star in the world, the legendary Steve McQueen. McQueen had observed Chuck's quiet, commanding presence. He saw a profound, simmering gravity in his instructor that Chuck himself was still learning to fully recognize. One afternoon, McQueen looked at the martial arts champion and offered a piece of blunt, life-altering advice. "If you can't do anything else," McQueen told him with his trademark, cynical grin, "there's always acting. You have a presence, Chuck. The camera will love you." Chuck was hesitant. He was 34 years old. He had no formal training in Shakespeare or the Stanislavski method. When he finally began to pursue acting seriously in the late 1970s, the Hollywood critics were absolutely merciless. They dismissed his performances as wooden. They mocked his slow, deliberate line delivery. They labeled him a one-dimensional fighter pretending to be an actor. But the critics, sitting in their ivory towers in Los Angeles and New York, completely fundamentally misunderstood the American public. When films like Breaker in 1977 and Good Guys Were Black in 1978 hit the theaters, the working-class audiences of America did not care about polished, theatrical dialogue. They looked at Chuck Norris and they saw something the slick, manufactured Hollywood machine rarely offered. They saw absolute, unvarnished authenticity. He didn't look like an actor trying to be tough. He looked like a man who had actually been tested. He moved like a man who knew exactly how to dismantle a threat in a dark alley. There was no pretense. There was no performance. There was only presence. By the dawn of the 1980s, the boy who had been too terrified to speak in a classroom was about to become one of the most bankable, universally adored action stars on the planet. But as he prepared to trade his karate GI for a massive arsenal of cinematic weapons, Chuck Norris was about to prove that his true power did not lie in his fists. It lay in his absolute, unbending moral compass, a code of honor that was about to make him the ultimate patriarch of American television. The Texas Ranger, the moral compass, and the old school anchor. There is a highly unpredictable, deeply cynical evolution that occurs within the machinery of pop culture. By the mid-1980s, the cinematic landscape of Hollywood was undergoing a massive, fundamental shift. The industry had fallen entirely in love with the concept of the anti-hero. Studios began churning out scripts featuring heavily flawed protagonists, morally gray storylines, and characters who routinely compromise their integrity for the sake of grittier, darker, and more controversial narrative. Hollywood was actively erasing the traditional line between the good guy and the bad guy. They were selling the American public a new philosophy, that honor was obsolete and that true virtue was simply a naive illusion. But Chuck Norris refused to read from that script. When he transitioned from a martial arts champion to one of the most bankable, universally recognized action stars in the world, headlining explosive, high-octane blockbusters like Missing in Action in 1984, Code of Silence in 1985, and The Delta Force in 1986, he did something incredibly rare. He planted his feet into the ground, and he drew an absolute, uncompromising line in the sand. Chuck looked at the shifting, cynical tides of the entertainment industry, and he vehemently refused to surrender his soul to the current. He demanded that his characters reflect a very specific, fiercely guarded set of principles. He would not portray men who betrayed their families. He would not participate in storylines that glorified destructive, chaotic lifestyles. He insisted that his movies project a clear, unyielding moral compass. When the villain was defeated, it wasn't just a victory of physical martial arts. It was the ultimate, necessary triumph of right over wrong. For the critics sitting in their elite, coastal offices, this absolute black and white morality was dismissed as too simple, too rigid, and lacking in theatrical nuance. They called his acting wooden. They mocked his refusal to adapt to the darker trends of the decade. But the critics, completely disconnected from the beating heart of the country, entirely misunderstood the profound, aching hunger of the American public. The working-class families of veterans, the fathers and mothers sitting in darkened theaters across the globe, did not want a conflicted anti-hero. They were living in a world that was rapidly spinning out of control, a world where traditional values seemed to be evaporating by the minute. They desperately needed an anchor. They needed to look up at the silver screen and see a man who still believed in respect, in discipline, and in fighting for the people who could not fight for themselves. Chuck Norris wasn't just an action star to them. He was a promise that the old-school American spirit was not dead. In 1993, Chuck made a decision that would permanently, irrevocably elevate him from a popular movie star into a genuine, generational cultural institution. He transitioned to television, bringing his unwavering moral code directly into the living rooms of millions of families every single week. He became Cordell Walker in the legendary series Walker, Texas Ranger. For 8 magnificent seasons, ending in 2001, Walker, Texas Ranger completely dominated Saturday night television. Week after week, Cordell Walker rode across the vast, sun-baked landscapes of Texas, dispensing absolute justice with a combination of lightning-fast fists, an unshakable faith, and a moral code as straight and true as a highway through the flatlands. The show was not designed to win prestigious Emmy Awards or to impress cynical journalists. It was designed to bring families together. Reflecting on the colossal, unprecedented success of the series and his fierce dedication to preserving a sense of honorable television, Chuck later delivered a quote that beautifully strips away the vanity of Hollywood and exposes the pure, decent heart of the man. "I wanted to do a show that had good moral values," Chuck explained, his voice carrying the calm, steady authority of a man who knows exactly who he is. "I want a show that the entire family could watch together. We wanted to show that right is right and wrong is wrong, and that there are consequences for your actions. I've always believed that you can entertain people without having to compromise your integrity. You can entertain people without having to compromise your integrity." Listen to the absolute, majestic dignity in that statement. For the 60 and older audiences watching this, the grandparents who now struggle to find television programs they can safely watch with their grandchildren without having to mute the volume or cover their eyes, Chuck's philosophy is an absolute revelation. He was a guardian of decency. In a world that was constantly pushing boundaries just for the sake of shock value, Chuck Norris used his immense power to fiercely protect the innocence and the values of the American home. This profound, unrelenting commitment to honor did not just resonate with television viewers. It commanded the absolute, overwhelming respect of the very real, flesh-and-blood law enforcement officers he portrayed. In December of 2010, the line between Hollywood mythology and historical reality was beautifully, permanently erased. In a deeply sincere, deeply emotional ceremony, the state of Texas officially honored the actor who had represented their most famous institution for a decade. Texas Governor Rick Perry pinned an actual, authentic badge onto the chest of the 70-year-old actor, officially swearing Chuck Norris in as an honorary member of the Texas Rangers. It was not a promotional stunt. It was not a publicity tour. It was a sacred acknowledgement by an institution that recognized a kindred spirit. When you look at photographs of Chuck Norris standing on that stage in 2010, receiving that badge, you're witnessing the ultimate poetic closing of a magnificent circle. The terrified, stuttering, invisible boy from the dust of Oklahoma, the kid who was paralyzed by fear and abandoned by his father, had grown up to become an officially recognized, undisputed symbol of justice and strength in the United States of America. He had forged his armor in Korea. He had conquered the global box office. He had successfully defended his moral compass against the relentless, corrosive pressures of the entertainment industry. He had achieved a level of fame and respect that most men cannot even fathom. He was a stoic patriarch, the quiet martial artist who let his actions speak infinitely louder than his words. But as the calendar turned past the year 2005, a completely strange, entirely unpredictable, and wildly humorous phenomenon was quietly brewing in the depths of a new digital frontier. The internet, a chaotic, rapidly expanding universe of young voices, was about to discover the stoic Texas Ranger. And they were about to take the quiet, humble, God-fearing man from Oklahoma and turn him into something no screenwriter, no director, and no studio executive could have ever possibly invented. They were about to turn him into an immortal, indestructible mythological god. But as the world began to laugh at the exaggerated, invincible internet memes, they completely missed the quiet, agonizing, and terrifying real-life battle that was rapidly approaching his own living room. The man who the internet claimed could never be defeated was about to face a tragedy that would bring him completely to his knees. The internet god, the medical nightmare, and the ultimate vow. There's a bizarre, completely unpredictable phenomenon that occurs when a man becomes so universally recognized for a specific trait that society decides to turn him into a myth. In the early 2000s, long after his peak box office dominance, an entirely new generation of teenagers and young adults discovered the stoic, bearded Texas Ranger. But they did not view him as a television actor. The internet, operating with its trademark, chaotic absurdity, transformed Chuck Norris into a supernatural deity of absolute, indestructible masculinity. A global digital phenomenon known as Chuck Norris facts swept across the planet like wildfire. Millions of people eagerly shared exaggerated, impossible claims about his toughness. Chuck Norris doesn't read books. He stares them down until he gets the information he wants. When Chuck Norris does a push-up, he isn't lifting himself up. He is pushing the earth down. Chuck Norris's tears cure cancer. But it's too bad he has never cried. The jokes were endless. They were hilarious. And they elevated a humble, God-fearing martial artist from Oklahoma into an immortal, untouchable comic book superhero. Chuck handled this bizarre, overwhelming tidal wave of internet worship with an incredibly rare, self-deprecating grace. He didn't sue the creators. He didn't take himself too seriously. He laughed at the jokes, appeared on late-night talk shows to read his favorite ones, and graciously accepted his bizarre new status as the internet's invincible god. But the universe has an incredibly cruel, unsentimental way of reminding us that no man, no matter how many black belts he holds, and no matter how many millions of people joke about his immortality, is ever truly exempt from the devastating, agonizing fragility of the human body. While the digital world was laughing at his absolute invincibility, a terrifying, creeping nightmare was quietly invading his own living room. In 1998, Chuck had married Gena O'Kelley, a beautiful, fiercely intelligent former model who was 23 years his junior. Gena was the absolute light of his later years. She brought an immense, radiant joy into his life, and together they welcomed twins. Chuck had settled into a profoundly peaceful, quiet era of his existence. But in 2012, the flawless, golden sanctuary of their family was violently, catastrophically shattered. Gena was scheduled to undergo a series of routine magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, scans to monitor a minor health issue. To enhance the clarity of the scans, doctors injected her with a standard, widely used heavy metal contrast agent. It was supposed to be a simple, ordinary, and entirely safe medical procedure. But within hours of the injections, a terrifying, incomprehensible medical crisis began to unfold. Gena began experiencing severe, violent tremors. An intense, agonizing burning sensation spread like wildfire throughout her entire body. She suffered profound cognitive deterioration, kidney complications, and a level of physical pain so relentless, so absolutely excruciating, that it completely resisted every conventional painkiller the hospital could offer. In a matter of days, the vibrant, active mother of two was reduced to a fragile, bedridden patient, fighting for her very survival. Imagine the sheer, unadulterated psychological torture of that exact moment for Chuck Norris. This is a man who spent 40 years on the silver screen defeating entire armies of heavily armed mercenaries. This is the man who built a billion-dollar empire entirely on his ability to physically dismantle any threat that dared approach his family. And yet, standing in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of an intensive care unit, looking down at the woman he loved more than life itself as she screamed in agony, the ultimate action hero was completely, fundamentally powerless. You cannot deliver a roundhouse kick to a neurological crisis. You cannot shoot a burning sensation in the nerves. Faced with medical mystery that the doctors struggled to comprehend, Chuck Norris did not hesitate for a single microscopic fraction of a second. The man who commanded millions of dollars per film, the legendary icon who was still receiving massive, lucrative offers from Hollywood studios, made a decision that permanently redefines the very concept of a devoted husband. He walked away from it all. He completely abandoned his legendary career. He stopped accepting scripts. He shut down his production companies. The internet's invincible god effectively vanished from the public eye, trading his custom-tailored suits and movie sets for the sterile, agonizing reality of hospital waiting rooms. For months on end, the toughest man on the planet slept on a small, uncomfortable chair next to Gena's hospital bed. He refused to leave her side. Reflecting on the sheer, terrifying desperation of that era and the absolute evaporation of his Hollywood ego, Chuck later delivered a quote of such raw, bleeding vulnerability that it shatters the heart of anyone who hears it. "I've given up my film career to concentrate on Gena," Chuck admitted softly, his voice stripped of all cinematic bravado, reduced entirely to the weary, desperate cadence of a terrified husband. "My whole life right now is about keeping her alive. I believe this issue is so important. She was dying right in front of me. She was dying right in front of me." Listen to the agonizing, suffocating helplessness in those 7 words. For the older audiences watching this, especially the men who have built their entire identities around being the strong, unwavering protectors of their homes, only to realize that they're completely incapable of protecting their wives from a medical diagnosis. That sentence is an absolute, devastating emotional strike. It strips away the illusion of control. It proves that behind the internet jokes and the Texas Ranger badge, Chuck Norris was just an ordinary, heartbroken man, begging the universe not to take his wife. The battle they waged was grueling, astronomical in cost, and completely exhausting. They traveled across the United States, desperately seeking answers. They eventually flew as far as China to receive alternative stem cell therapies. The total cost of the specialized medical treatments approached $2 million. They eventually filed a massive lawsuit against the medical manufacturers, not merely to seek financial compensation, but to aggressively warn the world and protect thousands of other families who might be suffering in the dark. Gena eventually survived. Slowly, agonizingly, she reclaimed her health, but the grueling multi-year war left permanent, undeniable scars on the soul of Chuck Norris. He had saved her. He had fulfilled the absolute, sacred promise he made at the altar. But the years spent in the trenches of the medical system had fundamentally altered him. The superficial noise of Hollywood, the internet memes, the box office records. None of it mattered anymore. He had looked into the terrifying, pitch-black abyss of losing his wife, and he returned to the surface with profound, quiet, and deeply humbled understanding of how fragile human existence truly is. He was in his 80s now. The long, brutal fight had aged an immortal legend. The world assumed that having survived this terrible ordeal, the aging cowboy would simply fade quietly into the sunset, spend his final years in the peaceful, sun-drenched sanctuary of his Hawaiian retreat. They assumed the final chapter of his life was peacefully, permanently written. But the universe, with its infinitely cruel, unpredictable timing, was merely letting the old warrior catch his breath. The man who had sacrificed his entire career to keep his wife alive was completely unaware that his own biological clock was quietly, rapidly ticking toward zero. The internet had spent 20 years joking that Chuck Norris could never die. But as the calendar turned to the fateful month of March 2026, the world was about to discover, in the most sudden, shocking, and heart-stopping way imaginable, that even the gods of our childhood must eventually close their eyes. The tax of longevity, the quiet funerals, and the accountability of a man. There is a silent, inescapable tax levied upon the gift of a long life. The world often views extreme old age as the ultimate victory, a triumphant marathon where the survivor gets to stand alone at the finish line. But the stark, unvarnished mathematics of outliving your generation carries a devastating psychological weight. When you cross the threshold into your mid-80s, the greatest battles are no longer fought in martial arts arenas or on Hollywood soundstages. The greatest battles are fought in the quiet, echoing rooms of your own memory, as you are forced to systematically say goodbye to the very people who anchored your existence to the earth. By the time the calendar turned to 2024, Chuck Norris had already buried more profound grief than most men are forced to carry in 3 lifetimes. He had survived the crushing poverty of the Dust Bowl, survived the terrifying medical nightmare that nearly claimed his second wife, Gena, and survived the relentless, exhausting machinery of global fame. But the universe, completely indifferent to his legendary status, was preparing to aggressively empty the crowded rooms of his past. In December of 2024, the absolute, immovable bedrock of his entire life finally gave way. His mother, Wilma Norris, passed away. She was an astonishing 103 years old. To understand the sheer, breathtaking magnitude of this loss, you must look back at the terrified, stuttering little boy in Oklahoma. Wilma was the iron-willed matriarch who had raised 3 boys largely alone, working her hands to bone to keep them from starving. She had carried her profound Christian faith like a blazing torch through the absolute darkest, most freezing nights of their abandonment. Chuck's tribute to his mother was simple, stripped of all celebrity pretense, and devastated in equal measure. He wrote that she had been a woman of unwavering faith, a beacon of light, and that her love had always reflected something infinitely greater than herself. She had outlived almost everyone who had ever known her. But even at 103 years old, she could not outlive the agonizing, bottomless grief her passing left behind in the chest of her 84-year-old son. The man who had protected the world on screen was suddenly just an orphan standing in the winter cold, mourning the woman who had first taught him how to pray. But the cruel, relentless ticking of the clock did not pause to allow the old cowboy to catch his breath. Barely 12 months later, in December of 2025, the universe struck a second agonizing blow. Dianne Holechek, Chuck's first wife, died in her Texas home at 84 years old, following a long, incredibly quiet and dignified battle with dementia. The story of Chuck and Dianne is a profound, beautifully complex, and deeply human chapter that totally defies the superficial, sanitized narratives of Hollywood. They had loved each other since Chuck was just a 16-year-old boy. They met at North High School in Torrance, California. She was a girl who somehow looked past the paralyzing stutter and the poverty and saw the absolute, undeniable worth of the invisible boy. They married in 1958 when they were barely adults. For 30 years, Dianne stood squarely beside him through every single grueling step of the climb. She endured the poverty of the early years, the obsessive bleeding knuckles of his martial arts training, the brutal rejections of the casting directors, and the slow, unlikely, and chaotic rise to global fame. But their 30-year marriage carried a deep, agonizing wound. During his years of military service, a young Chuck had been unfaithful, fathering a daughter named Gena with another woman. For decades, the fiercely private actor kept this painful secret locked away in the dark. But in his 2024 memoir, approaching the final chapters of his life, Chuck Norris made a decision that fundamentally separates a genuine man from a manufactured idol. He refused to take the lie to his grave. He wrote about his infidelity and his hidden daughter with the blunt, unflinching honesty of a man who had decided that the truth, however incredibly ugly and humiliating, deserved to be faced head-on. He owned his failure. He embraced Gena when she finally reached out to him in 1991, publicly acknowledging his child. But the damage to his marriage with Dianne had been a heavy burden. They officially separated in 1988 and divorced in 1989. 30 years of shared life, quietly, tragically folded away into boxes. Yet, it is exactly what happened after the divorce that elevates this story into an absolute masterclass of old-school, honorable maturity. In an industry where divorces are routinely weaponized into bitter, multi-million-dollar public wars, Chuck and Dianne refused to destroy each other. Chuck maintained a deep, genuine, and intensely respectful friendship with a woman who had believed in him before the world ever knew his name. When Dianne passed away, her son Mike released a statement that carried the heavy, beautiful relief of a family who had walked a long, dark road. "We are thankful she is no longer suffering. She was the greatest mom." Chuck did not issue a loud, performative public relations statement. Instead, he simply posted a faded black and white photograph from 1975. It showed the two of them, young, smiling, standing together with their boys. It was a tribute of such profound, quiet dignity that it said absolutely everything without needing to utter a single word. It was an 85-year-old man acknowledging that regardless of how the marriage ended, the foundation of his entire life was built alongside that woman. For the audiences watching this, especially the men and women who carry the heavy, complicated scars of divorce, the regrets of their youth, and the quiet, enduring respect for the people they once loved, Chuck Norris's handling of his past is an absolute revelation. He proved that the true measure of man's strength is not achieving absolute perfection. True strength is the willingness to look at the wreckage you have caused, take absolute accountability for your sins, and ensure that forgiveness and respect are the final words spoken. By the time the calendar turned to the fateful year of 2026, the Invincible Texas Ranger was carrying a graveyard in his heart. The losses had left an undeniable mark on him. You could see it in the deepening lines etched across his face. You could see it in the profound quietness of his movements. You could see it in the way the people closest to him noticed that the legendary fighter had finally, subtly stopped pretending that time was not passing. He was an 85-year-old man who watched the curtains close on the most defining chapters of his history. When the world hits a man with that much concentrated, suffocating grief, the natural instinct is to surrender, to pull the blinds shut, sit in a comfortable chair, and wait for the clock to simply run out. But Chuck Norris did what he has always done when the universe tries to break him. He packed his bags, and he flew to the island of Kauai, Hawaii. Hawaii had become his ultimate, sacred sanctuary in his twilight years. It was a place where the golden Pacific light fell differently. It was an island where the pace of life asked absolutely nothing of him. In Hawaii, he could wake up in the cool, early morning mist, and train on the beach without the massive, crushing weight of his own mythology pressing down on his shoulders. For Chuck, the discipline of the body had always been an act of profound religious faith. Movement was prayer, sweat was devotion. He believed that as long as he could still throw a punch, as long as he could still command his muscles to obey, some essential, unbreakable part of his soul remained entirely intact. He was preparing to celebrate his 86th birthday on the islands. He was preparing to look directly into the lens of a camera and tell the entire internet that he was still the undisputed, invincible god of their childhoods. But as the warm Hawaiian sun rose over the Pacific in the early days of March, setting the stage for one final, viral moment of triumph, the absolute silence of the universe was preparing a terrifying ambush. The final bell was about to ring, and the man who had never lost a fight was about to be summoned for his ultimate, quiet departure. The last punch, the zombie plane, and the sudden sunset. There's a profound, almost divine wisdom in how a man chooses to spend his final moments on Earth. For the vast majority of human beings, the approach of old age is accompanied by a natural, gradual slowing down. We surrender to the comfortable rhythms of retirement, leaving the battles to a younger generation. But Chuck Norris was not a man who understood the concept of surrender. By the year 2025, the Invincible Texas Ranger was 85 years old. He had buried his mother. He had buried his first wife. He had fought the toughest battle of his life in a hospital room, bringing his beloved Gena back from the brink of death. His body carried the heavy, accumulated mileage of 8 decades of relentless fighting, but his spirit remained entirely unbroken. Hawaii, specifically the island of Kauai, had become his ultimate, sacred sanctuary in his twilight years. It was a place where the golden Pacific light fell differently. It was an island where the relentless, suffocating weight of his own mythology seemed to simply melt away with the ocean breeze. In Hawaii, he could escape the demands of Hollywood. He could train alone on the beach in the cool, early morning mist, throwing punches at a rising sun without the constant, crushing pressure of being a global icon. For Chuck, the discipline of the body had always been an act of profound, unwavering faith. Movement was prayer. Sweat was devotion. He believed that as long as he could still command his muscles, some essential, unbreakable part of his soul remained entirely intact. And even at 85, his commitment to his craft, the art of cinematic action, remained fiercely burning. His last professional project was a film with a title so inherently wild, so unapologetically absurd, that it perfectly captured the unique, irreverent spirit of Chuck Norris. It was called Zombie Plane. Imagine the sheer, wonderful absurdity of the premise. A routine flight is suddenly hijacked by a zombie outbreak. Chuck Norris, playing a legendary men-alike hero, is on board, tasked with saving the day. The film, shot primarily on his Texas ranch, was his final cinematic act, a gloriously over-the-top, hard-hitting, completely unpretentious return to the action genre he had defined for half a century. He was throwing punches to the cameras until the very end. On March 10th, 2026, Chuck Norris turned 86 years old. He marked the occasion exactly how the world expected him to. He posted a video on social media from Hawaii. The sun was in the background, a training mat beneath his feet. There he was, the boy from Oklahoma who had once been invisible, sparring with an opponent half his age. He threw lightning-fast combinations with the same quiet precision that had defined him for 6 decades. He looked directly at the camera when it was over, breathing steadily, and delivered the line with a trademark grin that carried the heavy, magnificent weight of everything he had survived. I don't age. I level up. The internet exploded with joy. Fans flooded the post with tributes, celebrating his unbreakable spirit. The memes resurfaced with their old affection, jokingly declaring his immortality. For one brief, luminous moment, it felt like Chuck Norris was genuinely invincible. Not the meme version, but the real one, the man who had simply refused, across 86 years, to be anything less than fully alive. But the universe, with its infinitely cruel, unpredictable timing, was merely setting the stage for the final, most shocking act of his existence. Just 9 days later, the emergency struck without warning. A close friend who had spoken with Chuck on Wednesday, March 18th, reported that he had been in an upbeat mood, training, joking, and fully present. There was no indication that anything was wrong, no signs that fate was already moving. But on that same day, or in the early hours of Thursday, March 19th, 2026, a sudden, catastrophic medical emergency occurred on the island of Kauai, Hawaii. The details of what transpired remain private, held close by his grieving family. What is known is that the incident landed him in a hospital so suddenly that the people closest to him were caught completely off guard. The man who the internet claimed could never die was facing the one opponent he could not roundhouse kick into submission. On the morning of March 20th, 2026, the Norris family posted a statement to Chuck's Instagram page that stopped the world cold. It read, "It is with heavy hearts that our family shares the sudden passing of our beloved Chuck Norris yesterday morning. While we would like to keep the circumstances private, please know that he was surrounded by his family and was at peace. He was 86 years old. He had been training 10 days before. He had posted a birthday video filled with movement, laughter, and the kind of defiant joy that only someone who has genuinely faced the worst that life can produce. And then, with a swiftness that matched almost nothing else in his biography, he was gone. The paradox was complete. The invincible icon, the man who had always been a symbol of absolute control, had been taken by an event that offered no warning, no negotiation, and absolutely no opportunity for a final bow. The final bell had rung. The silence that followed felt different from any tribute the internet had ever produced. Because somewhere buried beneath every joke about Chuck Norris never dying was a quiet understanding that people truly believed it. Not literally, but in the profound, spiritual way that you believe in someone who simply refuses to quit, no matter how hard life hits them. The last legendary punch had been thrown. The final script had been shot. The audience, still waiting for his last movie, was left with powerful, heartbreaking cinematic mystery. They had not yet seen his last fight on screen, but the ultimate warrior had already fought his final, quiet battle in the real world. He had not died in darkness or defeat. He had died surrounded by his family, at peace, on an island bathed in the golden, gentle light of the Pacific. And he had died, in his own magnificent way, exactly as he had always claimed he would. He did not age. He leveled up. The global silence, the true patriarch, and the ultimate level up. There's a profound, incredibly rare phenomenon that occurs when a man who has become larger than life suddenly departs from it. The world, which has spent 2 decades turning Chuck Norris into a mythological, indestructible internet god, suddenly stopped laughing. On the morning the news broke, the relentless, cynical, and noisy machinery of the internet did something it almost never does. It went completely, respectfully silent, because the memes, the exaggerated jokes about his tears curing diseases, and the tall tales of his impossible strength were never actually mocking him. They were, in their own strange modern way, a profound tribute. They were society's quiet acknowledgement that Chuck Norris represented a kind of unyielding, old-school resilience that we all desperately wish was immortal. We joked that he could never die, because somewhere deep in our hearts, we needed to believe that a man like him would simply always be there. But this was not a punchline. This was a man, and the man was gone. In the immediate days following his passing in March of 2026, the tributes poured in like a massive, global tidal wave. They did not just come from Hollywood actors or martial arts grandmasters. They came from every conceivable corner of the earth. They came from veterans who had felt seen and respected by his unwavering support for the military. They came from ordinary working-class fathers who had grown up watching Walker, Texas Ranger, on small, boxy televisions, seeing in him the kind of honest, uncompromising man they wanted to be. Even the highest echelons of the political world bowed their heads. Former President Donald Trump released a public statement mourning the loss of the 86-year-old icon, bypassing the polished political rhetoric to use the exact kind of plain, working-class language that Chuck himself would have appreciated. He called him a tough cookie and a great guy. It was a testament to his incredibly rare cultural footprint. Chuck Norris was not just an entertainer. He was a unifying symbol of American grit. But of all the tributes, all the headlines, and all the global tears, the most devastating and profound truth came from the very people who were holding his hand when the final bell rang. The statement released by the Norris family completely stripped away the Hollywood armor, the black belts, and the cinematic mythology, reducing the global titan to his purest, most beautiful essence. To the world, he was a martial artist, actor, and a symbol of strength. The family wrote, their words carrying the agonizing weight of unimaginable grief. To us, he was a devoted husband, a loving father and grandfather, an incredible brother, and the heart of our family. He lived his life with faith, purpose, and an unwavering commitment to the people he loved. Faith, purpose, commitment. Listen to the absolute, majestic dignity of those three words. They are the exact three pillars upon which the terrified, stuttering boy from Ryan, Oklahoma, had built his entire existence. When we step back and look at the absolute totality of his 86 years on Earth, the poetic, heartbreaking symmetry of his life comes into perfect, breathtaking focus. He was born into the suffocating dust of poverty, cowering in the terrifying shadow of an alcoholic, absent father. He was a boy who desperately wanted to be invisible, but he refused to let the trauma of his childhood dictate the man he would become. He forged his spine on the freezing wooden floors of a dojang in South Korea. He built a quiet, unbreakable confidence that caught the eye of Bruce Lee. He conquered the box office not by adopting the cynical, morally ambiguous trends of Hollywood, but by standing perfectly still and refusing to compromise his old-school, black and white morality. And when the ultimate test arrived, when the universe threatened to take the woman he loved in a terrifying medical nightmare, he proved that his greatest muscle was not his bicep. It was his heart. He walked away from millions of dollars in global fame, choosing instead to sleep on a small chair in a hospital room, guarding his wife's life with the ferocious, unconditional loyalty of a true patriarch. Chuck Norris never pretended to be perfect. In his deeply honest memoirs, he named his failures plainly. He acknowledged his mistakes, took accountability for his past, and carried his scars openly. But in every single chapter of his life, from the dust of Oklahoma to the cinematic glory of the Roman Colosseum, from the television sets of 100 million homes to that final, quiet morning in the golden light of Hawaii, he demonstrated the exact same absolute truth. The true measure of a man is not whether he falls. It is what he does in the silence after the fall. He survived poverty. He survived paralyzing self-doubt. He survived the unimaginable grief of burying his mother, his first wife, and his friends. And in the end, he did not die in darkness, and he absolutely did not die in defeat. He died exactly as he lived, surrounded by the people he fiercely protected, at peace, bathed in the warm Pacific sun, just days after throwing punches at the sky and declared with defiant grin that he was still in the fight. Carlos Ray Norris, born March 10, 1940, departed March 19, 2026, aged 86, martial artist, Air Force veteran, actor, husband, father, grandfather, and an absolute, unyielding believer. The legend of Chuck Norris was never the roundhouse kick. The legend was never the internet jokes or the action movies. The true, enduring legend was a terrified, stuttering boy who had every single reason in the world to give up and simply never, ever did. The ultimate warrior has finally put down his gloves. The screen has faded to black. But Chuck Norris did not die. Just as he promised the world 9 days before he closed his eyes, he simply leveled up. As we say a difficult goodbye to Chuck Norris, it truly feels like the end of an era. In a chaotic world, he stood as a reminder of old-school American grit, rooted in faith, family, and an unbreakable moral compass. What about you? What do you miss most about the generation of men Chuck represented? Please honor his memory by sharing your thoughts in the comments below. If his extraordinary journey inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of the legends we love. Thank you for your time. Protect the people you love. Hold on to your faith. And until next time, keep leveling up.